What would you tell aspiring filmmakers, Shawn, if they wanted to make a big impact with these topics of animal rights, environmental activism, human health, food production? What would be your sort of tips from your area of expertise to give up-and-coming filmmakers?
Yeah, when I think of the films that are kind of rated high by our judges each year, a lot of times it's there's an emotional connection there. And it's usually an emotional connection to a person related to animals. And so building that story, kind of like Liz mentioned, around that character, and in a couple of cases I'm thinking about, it's sanctuary owners that started off as dairy farmers, things like that. There's several films out there like that right now. They always seem to be rating high in with our judges. Obviously, yeah, the humor as well is good, and I think that creativity about building a story without showing necessarily the blood, guts, and gory. I think that's evolving. Joanne MacArthur, We Animals, and Kelly and their group are great at doing those stories, those short stories with with that kind of impact. And I think that's going to only emerge. I think as well, the kind of storylines are going to emerge in terms of topics. It's not necessarily going to be health related or direct animal related. It's going to be maybe vegan families or a vegan office environment, or taking it broadly, or having a vegan character in a mainstream movie. Things like that, I think, are probably where the future is going to go.
Interesting. And would you agree on a lot of those points, John? What would you tell somebody, a content creator of any kind in this topic, in this world, who wants to make an impact with audiences? What would you suggest that they do?
Know the audience. I think a lot of times we have this notion that we have a great idea, and that because I had this idea, everybody's going to love it. It's like, no, you have to cater to the audience, not to your own wants. I think that's sometimes, we see that a lot, where people, like, just on social media, if we're talking about content, people will say, well, I made this post and only 2 people liked it. It was like, yeah, because you made it for yourself. You didn't make it for anybody else. Same thing translates over to film. It's like, you made this film that you thought was going to be so impactful, but you didn't think about the audience. And if you don't think about the audience or the customer or whatever the person that's supposed to support you, if they have nothing to gain by watching it or buying the product or buying the service, you just made something for yourself. And I think that's what people have to keep in mind as they go into this. You might have an awesome idea to you, but who else is it for? And that's what, like with our movie, it's for the people. I think everybody in here, all of our films have been for the people. It might have been our dream, it might have been our baby, as you could say, but our baby, we handed it off to everyone else. We're like, we trust you, here you go. And it's for them. And I think as long as people keep that in mind, then they'll be successful.
Demetrius, would you agree with that? Do you bring it back to film specifically as a filmmaker? Do you think considering the audience is really the most important part, or do you have other tips for up and coming filmmakers?
I don't know that is the most important part. I hear what you said, John, and I mostly agree. I think what's important, let me use Vegucated specifically, and then I want to back up a little bit, not just film. Are you talking to me or are you talking to yourself? Right? Basically the same thing you said. Marisa necessarily set out with Vegucated to get people thinking and to have a conversation and to instigate dialogue. A lot of people think she/we were out to move the needle and make a lot of people vegan. That would be great, but she was very studied and still is very studied about that's not going to happen. If that was going to happen, we would have seen films about civil rights in the 80s and the 90s, and we would be in a very different world than we're sitting in 2020. Same for vegetarianism, which was hotter right in those days, and then veganism would have been, we would have had this conversation maybe 10, 15 years ago. I think I think when you're a communicator or a slasher, I'm not sure if I want to say creator, but a communicator, social media, filmmaking, music maker, certainly journalists, bloggers, the list goes on, and a photojournalist, list goes on and on. If you're putting it out there for an audience, then I think you have to stay in conversation, right? Or some sort of dynamic or relationship, right? Might be the best word there. That's the nuance I think I would add on to what you said, John. I think some people, though, are meant to create for themselves. Film is very expensive. It's a team, not even sport. It requires a team, back to the labor and the cost. And so some have been able to do that. I don't know about in the vegan world, but if we look at a lot of indie film, documentaries or fiction narrative, 5, 10, 15, 20, and certainly going back forth, I think some of the pieces that audiences or viewers grapple with is they fall right in that lane you're saying, John. Oh, you were just talking to yourself, and so I don't totally know what you're saying and or agree or like it or relate, and the list goes on. But when we're in conversation, whatever scale the film is, and whatever the intent is, like part of what Liz said, then all sorts of things can happen. I think we can all speak to that. I think Shawn has that amazing role where you've seen that, I'm guessing, over dozens and maybe soon hundreds of films or of whatever length, and could probably go through very quickly and said, this person didn't ever iron out, or this team, who their audience was and or what they wanted to say or have people take away. Or writers have the same difficulties, but I think the ones that I've been able to chat with, particularly fiction, if they get into mainstream publisher, again, of whatever size or even self-publish, it's that they need this story, this message, this character, those pieces to get out to the world. And so they start negotiating with, how do I keep, this is still my child, but how do I put this child out into the world so it can engage with the world? But that's not always a requirement. But film is very expensive, emotionally, energetically, cash, labor, the list goes on. So it's not something I think we'll see with vegan films for a while, until we feel we've even more arrived at getting these different messages, for lack of a better word, out, right? We're on different missions, right? To change people's minds, plates, ideas, or just pop the bubble. No, we just don't eat tofu and grass or twigs and berries or whatever. So I think that intent is already there. And we know, if not consciously, at least mid-conscious, we have to speak to an audience, whether it's 5 people, 5 million, or 5 billion.
So I'm wondering, Keegan, on that note, if you were thinking of explaining this to, say, a high school student who's vegan and who, has seen your films, have seen all of your films, and says, I want to do that. What would you say, would be the first steps to making those connections and bringing those messages together to someone who's really starting out?
For anybody starting out, I mean, I think everybody would agree with this, is that having the passion, like if you're going to make a film, you've got to believe in it, and part of it should be for you, as John and Demetrius both said, like, this is something that you feel you can put your life into. But the biggest thing that I see, like, lots of young filmmakers and new filmmakers of any age, they want to jump into doing features. And that's like saying, I've never built a shed, but I'm going to build a house. And it's like, well, build a shed first, do a short film, shoot a whole bunch of little mini docs. You can tell a story in 5 minutes, then try and tell a story in 15 minutes and 50 minutes, and then, 90 minutes, whatever your length's going to be. But to start with what you've got and start small, because you will save yourself a ton of time and a ton of money and a ton of pain when you're trying to fix a problem on a 5-minute film versus a 55-minute film.
That's an excellent point. Excellent point. And something probably far less overwhelming for a new filmmaker to take on. That's a really good point. Finally, Liz, I want to know from your perspective, if you were to speak to female filmmakers, it's no coincidence that we only have one female panelist. I'm sure that the numbers are underrepresented for females in filmmaking. And I would love to hear what you would want to tell young or new female filmmakers specifically about how to get into this art form and this business.
Absolutely. That's a very topical, very important subject, as important as, filmmakers of color, BIPOC, having more agency, more funding. essentially it's about representation, it's about who's telling whose story, and it's about opportunity and, you know, the purse strings, right? And changing that paradigm. And it is changing. We are going through a cinema revolution, and documentary is like there's a renaissance here when it comes to, you know, films that are authored by women, films that are authored by, you know, creators that are of color. And so this is extremely important. Otherwise, we're just ingesting the same old narrative from the same old gaze over and over again. So, you know, I'm going to apply the same thing to the vegan lens, because, you know, or from an activist lens, you know, whether you're coming at it as an environmentalist or as a, you know, an animal rights for, you know, vegan from an ethical perspective. It's about how we tell those stories and who's telling those stories. And so I do mentor young filmmakers. I absolutely love doing that. It's a passion of mine. And actually there's an article, an interview with Women in Hollywood that was recently published with me about Meet the Future. And they always ask that same question. And so in a nutshell, like I would just say to young female filmmakers, roll up your sleeves. If you want to be a director, don't be afraid to touch gear, use gear, film, edit, do everything, because to be a good director means you also understand how to frame, how to shoot, how to edit, how to shape and construct your story. So try everything. Don't feel limited, ever. Don't ever feel limited, and be fearless. And eventually you're going to get to a place where you trust your own instincts, and you'll stop sort of listening to the, you know, the cacophony of voices outside of you, and you'll learn to listen to your own voice and follow that as your guide, as a creator. And I think, you know, that's certainly been my journey, and continues to be my journey.
Excellent.
Jessica, can I just add one thing?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, it's actually, you know, you said, you know, obviously in our panel here that there's only one female, but last year in the festival, over 65% of our filmmakers were female.
Wow. Oh, that's
Yeah.
excellent to hear.
Yeah, and it's probably about the same this year. It was actually close to 70% last year, closer to 70. And then on Keegan's point, you know, probably 70% of the films are short films, like under 30 minutes. That come into the festival, and we love those, and they're the ones that are easier to show. You know, our world tour is kind of made up of our best of our shorts, because we can't show 6 features in a row on a world tour screening in 2 hours. So yeah, there's definitely lots of power in short films, and there's a lot of great female filmmakers out there. And to go on Liz's point, you know, look out, seek them out as mentors. You know, I'm sure, like Liz says, she does mentor them. Like, they're so receptive, the ones that I know and that I've worked with the festival. So
is this a change you've seen over your time doing this in the last few years? This uptick of female makers?
Yeah, this is just our 3rd year of the festival right now, so it's been pretty the norm. Like the first 3 years, like last year there was definitely more female, and this year our submissions just closed a month ago, so I haven't got all the stats yet, but I'm guessing it's pretty close to the same. So
it's excellent. That's great to hear. Awesome to hear.
I want to add on, if I can, to a couple things. One, I'm the producer, one of the producers of Vegucated. The filmmaker proper, air quotes there, is Marisa. It was her idea, and there's a whole conversation to be had there. But one of the most important, and I'm trying to edit myself not to go on and on about it. One of the most important things, I came on later to the film. I wasn't involved with the production or the pre-production. I was involved somewhat with post-production, and really, I'm the midwife is the joke, but actually the reality of how I relate to Vegucated. I'm the midwife and the other stepdad, or the stepdad. And how does this, you know, how do we birth this movie brand baby, and go out in the world? One of the key things, though, I more want to say is, for any vegan activist, whether you're making shorts or features or neither, you can ask for help. Vegans are often, like, I'll probably cry here, amazingly generous within their means of time and budget. They want to be asked. I want to be asked. I know Keegan has had this experience at least a little bit that I'm for sure of, but about, Keegan is one of the best crowdfunders that I know of, vegan or not. That's really important when we talk about, going back to part of what Liz said about money. You need money at various points to make a film, vegan or not. You just, particularly a feature, you just do. It's part of the process. And it's part of why Marisa asked for help. Marketing is a lot of my background. And that just snowballed into a key conversation of, will you help me get this, birth this movie baby? The other thing I want to say that's super important, and Liz said it in a few ways. I want to articulate it like this because it was how I came onto Vegucated. We have to support female filmmakers, full stop. Particularly if we want to change the narratives that we're seeing. For sure, we can talk about queer filmmakers, or we can talk about BIPOC. Those are for sure important, no question. But getting more women to tell stories, right, in whatever formats, that's huge for the world, I don't even know how many times over. And that was a key draw for me to work on Vegucated. I knew I was supposed to produce. I'm not a director. I'm not going to play one on TV. I love the way behind the scenes such. And I wanted to work with at least a team of women, if not just a woman, and then things, Providence or whatever happened. But I want to say again, please go out of your way to support female filmmakers. That's crucial for film to change, veganism to change, and really for the world to change. And we're overdue to give the ladies the gear and all of the things. And riffing off of what Keegan said, filmmaking is much more complex than I think most people know, even those of us who have studied it. And you need help. You need to put on different hats and caps and bandanas, and literally and figuratively. So it's not I'll stop there and say, ask for help is key, and it should be uncomfortable, right? You're putting yourself out there, but it's part of the process. And please, please, please support all sorts of filmmakers, especially female filmmakers.
That's a really good point. And I think because in the vegan and animal activism, environmental activism world, I think we see the numbers are higher for female participants in general. And so to have, more of these people who are involved in different aspects of veganism and activism take on film as a tool of activism, really, in my opinion, it's a tool of activism. We have such an abundance of people with stories to tell. So that's a really, really great point. I'm glad we got to that point. I feel like we should give a shout out to Fern Levitt, director of filmmaker of Sled Dogs. She did a really good job, and she's one of the most strong promoters of film I've ever met. She does not quit, and I think we should give her a shout out in this moment.